Thank you for coming. Thank you, Eduardo, for the nice words. And here it is the small cake, small cherry on the cake, we can say, to conclude this interesting day for me. From here it is what we can say that the representation of a small consignment nowadays about tangible goods. And as my colleagues said, new business models are developing and shopping online is spreading. We know new actors popped up, such as e-commerce platforms and suppliers of online payments. And in this context, it has been said, the speed of the delivery is essential mostly for the online stores. But this is what we see as customers, and this is most likely what we don't see. It's just an interaction of different parties and a huge amount of information exchange. As mentioned, the online trade is mostly business to consumers transaction. Sellers sell directly to final consumers, to final customers. There are different players. Here I will focus on transaction of tangible goods, small consignments, and in particular of the last part of this process, of this B2C transaction. That's when the goods cross the borders of the European Union. And when it comes to importation, we know that according to the general rules, the supply of goods from third countries to a consumer in the EU is in principle a taxable transaction, so custom duties and import VAT are due. But there are some exemptions. We have mentioned this exemption, but what they are. And this is the case of small consignments where import VAT and custom duties, aren't due at the borders. Currently, at the EU level, the import VAT exemptions of small consignment is regulated by VAT directive and the directive of 2009 number 132 that determines the scope of this exemption. As regards the import duties, is the Council regulation that searched for the import duties exemptions. But why these exemptions, and which are the requirements of these exemptions? This provision aims mainly to facilitate the movement and reducing the administrative burden on customs authorities and to speed up the delivery of lower value goods. Because the administrative costs related to the levy of VAT and duties could be higher than the value, than the duty and the VAT effectively levied. So the first requirement is that the goods are shipped directly from non-EU country sellers to customer. As regards the import duties, the customs duty relief applies to consignment of negligible value, and goods of negligible value means goods with an intrinsic value of 150 euros. And what we means for intrinsic value is the value of the product. As regards import VAT, the directive provides an exemption for imported goods of negligible value not exceeding a total value between 10 euros up to 22 euros. And it refers to the total value, not to the intrinsic value. The total value is the intrinsic value plus the handling costs. This relief do not apply to alcoholic products, perfumes, and tobacco products. But this will be the situation until 2021. Why? The things are changed. The VAT threshold was first implemented in 1983, so an era where there was not yet the EU single market created in 1993, and there was no sign of digitalization. And we know that globalization and digitalization have led to an increase of exchanges with third countries, and thus an increase of imports into the EU. Now, we have, as Eduardo said, these small consignments have an impact on our market and on the international trade. And it is estimated that around 150 million parcels are imported into the EU under this VAT exemption every year. So, moreover, these exemptions create some distortion against EU businesses that are in a disadvantage with respect to non-EU businesses. There is also a tendency of relocation of companies outside the EU in order to take advantage of this exemption. But the main issue is the underreporting. As my colleagues mentioned before, is that non-EU retailers have taken advantage of these exemptions by mislabeling and undervaluing high-value goods such as smartphones and tablets mostly. We have losses of tax revenues up to 5 billion annually. The EU solution has been mentioned by my colleagues, but it seems there are still some problems. Since these exemptions have become increasingly controversial, we have to find a balance between the protection of the budget, so the member states' tax revenue, but also to try to avoid distortions and take into account the administrative costs of low-value consignments. The EU actualized the so-called VAT e-commerce package, and in particular the Council Directive 2017-2455 that provides that, well, remove the VAT exemption that I mentioned for imports of small consignments not exceeding 22 euros. So the exemption that I mentioned will disappear, but create an import special scheme named also OSS, that is one-stop shop, and that covers distance sales of goods imported from third countries to customers in the EU that concerns consignments with intrinsic value not exceeding 150 euros. According to the scheme, non-EU distance sellers shall register for VAT in one member state. A VAT identification number is given to this non-EU distance seller, and the invoicing rules of the identification, the member states of identification will apply. The seller will charge and collect the VAT at the moment of the supply, so when the payment has been accepted, and at the moment of the importation, there is no VAT due at at the customs. So, because the VAT is due where the transport ends, not at the borders. This if the VAT identification number is provided to the customs authorities. That's a small representation of this. And as Marie said, there is the provision concerning the electronic platforms that could facilitate, we can say, these transactions. But there is another provision, maybe that wasn't mentioned, that is, if this special scheme is not used, but the good has an intrinsic value not exceeding 150 euros, it could be that the customs presenter, normally the courier, the postal operators, will pay the import VAT and will collect VAT from the final consumer. Well, but there is still the problem that the web shop can still understate value for customs and VAT purposes. This issue haven't been addressed by the VAT package, I think, and it was also mentioned by my colleague. And some conclusions. Well, it's true that the new rules offer some simplification as regards clearance, as customs clearance, of course. We reduce maybe distortion, considering the removal of the VAT exemption, the import VAT exemption, but the setting up of the new import special scheme, the cost of this setting up are quite high. The new rules affect platforms, but also couriers and postal operators that should manage the VAT collection, and the issue of the undervaluing is still there. And so maybe after this day of talking about relationship between China and Europe, maybe an agreement, a special agreement with China could be a solution, since it's interest of both parties. And that's my main point, and I will address also my thesis. So we will see what the future will be. And that's all, and I thank you.